Distinguished audience, I am very honored to participate in this outstanding event, and I'm most grateful to the organizers for inviting me here. The theme of my presentation has its own origins in the debates over what our moral tradition called behaviors or sins contrary to nature, such as abortion, homosexuality, sex changing, and even the transhumanist program. The very meaning of nature, and I refer here and further to human nature, is controversial, as well as the moral arguments that ascribe its normativity. The difficulty of the arguments from nature are at least twofold. On the one hand, a widespread depreciation in contemporary culture of the classical idea of nature as a set of inherent, defining, and immutable characteristics common to a multitude of individuals. On the other hand, the meaning of this concept is disputed even within Orthodox theology today. Many prestigious theologians are critical of a moral vision based on a natural law which they consider foreign to the Orthodox ethos. For example, Vladimir Lossky, Oleg Dokimov, Olivier Clement, John Meyendorff, Stanley Harakas, John Zizioulas, Christos Yanaras, and Hermann Tristan Engelhardt. In what follows, I reflect in 5 points on these difficulties of the concept of nature, and I suggest an alternative, namely the argument from origin, and I assess its apologetic credibility. 1. The cultural discredit of nature. The contemporary discrediting of nature concerns in particular its essentialism, that is to say, its definitive, immutable aspect. In contrast to a series of notions related to it, such as substance, constitution, principle, form, or finality, and which every one of them admit a certain modality, change, or diversity, nature is broadly understood as a permanent, deterministic condition. Nature thus appears as a given once and for all. Obviously, such a vision hardly fits with the exuberance of current ideas about freedom, creativity, innovation, evolution, development, and the like. And the desire for change, and especially for progress, seems inherent to the human condition, isn't it? Beyond the strong imperative of autonomy, the contestation of the essentialist interpretation of nature invokes the either irreducibility of phenomenological variability to any attempt to establish defining and as such normative traits. No set of traits could always be found identical in all plausible members of the species, and other traits which may be important for some members cannot be considered defining. Hence, the suspicion of or accusation that any essentialist understanding of nature is more or less ideological and oppressive. As such, it is not surprising that arguments from nature are on the defensive in just about every field of contemporary knowledge, including theology. 2. Difficulties and controversies in Orthodox theology. I will limit myself to mentioning here both the success and the criticism that personalism or personology enjoys in contemporary Orthodox theology in various fields, like triadology, anthropology, ecclesiology, sacramental theology, moral theology, and of course bioethics. Suffices to mention the late Metropolitan Ioannis Zizioulas and the eminent pathologist Jean-Claude Lachey, one of his most renowned critics. Without addressing here the validity of the pros and contras, we can note that in anthropological context, 2 interrelated aspects made it difficult to invoke the moral normativity of nature. First of them, the fact that human nature knows several existential or topological regimes, an original or protological regime, a post-lapsarian, pre-incarnation regime, a soteriological regime in Christ and in the Church, and finally, an eschatological regime. I think we can admit that although the divine reasons that define nature, to borrow the terminology of Maximus the Confessor, St. Maximus the Confessor, logos des physeos, that this divine nature does not undergo any change, their modes of actualization and manifestation know not only individual hypostatic or ontogenetic variations, tropostis hyparxeos, but also certain trans-individual and phylogenetic plasticity. Likewise, not only can we identify a corruption of nature contrary to nature and a certain arethological restoration of her, but also a regime above nature, hyper physin, that which is in fact specific to holiness and divinization, as for example in St. Maximus Athanasium 22. I will return to this dynamism of nature below, but it's clear that invoking it as normative raises significant problems of interpretation. 3. In search of the origins. At the same time, the preoccupation with origins has evidently taken on new dimensions, even if it is often precisely with the aim of challenging and transcending them. Apart from those fields traditionally devoted to such research, such as the religious or historical sciences, we are witnessing a huge epistemological excavation of origins in the field of cultural sciences, the origins of language and ideas, in psychology and psychotherapy, the origin of behavior, in biology, the origin of life and species, anthropology, the origin of humans, in medicine, ethiopathology, and in the science of the physical universe like geology, chemistry, and especially physics, the origin of the universe. Of course, the purposive and heuristic methods employed are extremely diverse. For example, narratives, etymological analysis, genealogical analysis, genetic analysis, or the analysis of the fine structure of matter. But whatever retroactive method is used, the epistemological force seems to be given by a principle of causality. Origin seems to contain an initial cause, not just a starting point, a root, not just a foundation, a stemming, not just a coming. Unlike a mere beginning, origin seems to contain a constitutive principle, an archetype, and an operating code. There is no doubt that, at least terminologically, the original concept of nature refers to that which appears, springs up, is born, or grows. In Greek, physis is derived from phyo. In Latin, natura is derived from nascor, related to the Greek genao, and thus contains the very idea of origin. But the concept of origin also seems to offer other meanings, such as that of an authority as coming from an author, Latin auctor, or of a primary condition, similar to, for instance, to the state of nature as a pre-political state in the original theories of the social contract. In these senses, the search of an origin appears not only as an attempt to identify a defining constitution, but rather as a reconstitution, a rebour, of the initial condition and of its possible author. Also, unlike nature, the concept of origin implies the concepts of time and historicity. 4. Contested origins, proclaimed origins. In the contemporary cultural and political spaces, a person's origin is treated differently. In many contexts, it is strongly contested. In other contexts, strongly affirmed. For example, phenotypical sex is only the last of the conditions at birth put on the infamous list of those to be eliminated in the fight against social inequalities. For instance, fraternal birth order, legitimacy of birth, social status, ethnic or racial status. Civilization would progress toward the irrelevance of birth status to one social performance, as a social role based on sexual phenotype, gender dimorphism will no longer play any decisive role in the social reproduction today as did it in the past. And its preservation would be a supremacist or anti-meritocratic alibi for some and an oppressive matrix for others. At the same time, we are dealing with a proud affirmation of origins, as proclaimed by the slogan "Born This Way" of the LGBTQ movements, or by various movements promoting ethnic and racial identity against colonialism, Black Pride, BLM, Latino or Hispanic Pride, Indigenous or Native Pride, etc. For its part, transhumanism seems unimpressed by the evolutionary origins of the current human condition and seeks to historically take over the role of natural selection to technologically produce an enhancement or enhanced version of the human nature, worrying nothing about the paradox of Theseus' ship. 5. An Eastern patristic perspective. From an Eastern patristic perspective, I illustrate the issues of origin and nature with the vision of Saint Maximus the Confessor, who, in a Christian reworking of the Aristotelian dialectic of nature as potency and actuality, assigns potency to the attribute of being created in the image of God and actuality to its likeness. About the person who realizes the course from image to likeness to the deiform virtues, Saint Maximus says, having completed this course, such a person becomes God, receiving from God to be God, to the beautiful nature inherent in the fact that he is God's image, he freely chooses to add the likeness to God by means of the virtues in a natural movement of ascent through which he grows in conformity with his own beginning, in Ambiguous 7. As elsewhere in his work, St. Maximus here teleologically unites the origin of existence with its end, both of them in God. It is not, however, a simple return to an original condition, but rather a fulfillment, which, although he compares it with the fruits obtained by the cultivation of seeds, St. Maximus identifies it, in fact, with the access to a supernatural condition, that is deification. The relationships between nature and deification is not easy to specify. But for us, it suffices to point out that St. Maximus seems to understand nature through the dynamism of the relationship between origin and finality, rather than origin and finality as givens of nature.
Professor Moldovan, sorry for the interruption, you have 2 minutes left.
Thank you so much, yes, thank you. This perspective can provide us important elements for an orthodox critical evaluation of gender ideologies and other cultural critiques of nature and origins, as Jean-Claude Lachey has recently done in his volume Transfigurer le Genre. In conclusion, the argument from the origin has, in my opinion, these apologetic advantages. 1, it emphasizes not only the given, but also the becoming and the development, in which self-determination, of course, plays an indispensable, prominent, though not singular, role. Self-determination also requires the contribution of nature as the sum of the endowments, capacities, or capabilities that self-determination may mobilize. Second, origination also better emphasizes the ontological relationship between creator and creature as a personal one. But at the same time, it is a naturally personal relationship, since nature itself participates in this relationship through the endowment it offers to the person at the same time benefits from it through transfiguration and deification. Thank you so much for your attention.